Hey, beautiful, please consider subscribing to our channel if you've been enjoying these stories. Your support helps a lot. Aid us in reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
The post-hole digger thudded into the dry earth again and again, each strike echoing through the otherwise quiet morning air. The sun was barely over the trees, but already sweat rolled down my spine, sticking my shirt to my back like glue. I wiped. My brow glanced at the new cedar planks stacked neatly nearby, then bent back to work. My fence was going to be simple, clean, 8 feet tall for privacy. I had already measured everything twice, just like Grandpa taught me. And then I heard it. That voice. "What do you think you're doing?" I froze, hands still wrapped around the handles of the digger. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crawled up my neck. I turned slowly. There she was, marching down the sidewalk in her peach cardigan, clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other. Her name was Linda, but everyone in the neighborhood called her HOA Karen, not to her face. Of course, unless they wanted a violation notice in their mailbox the next morning. Building a fence on my property. I said simply, brushing dirt from my gloves. She scoffed, the sound sharp and theatrical. "This violates Article 7, subsection B of the HOA Landscaping Covenants. You can't build any structure without prior approval." I blinked. "I don't live in the HOA." "Ho!" She looked at me as if I had spoken in ancient Greek. "Everyone in this neighborhood is in the HOA. Not me. My lot is grandfathered out. My deed is on file with the county I already checked." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just throw up a fence wherever you want. This is a community, not a junkyard." I stared at her for a beat. "It's not wherever I want. It's on my land. And it's not a junkyard fence. It's cedar pre-treated, clean lines. No barbed wire, no paint, just a fence." Linda's jaw clenched. She pulled out her phone and started tapping furiously. "You have 10 seconds to stop construction, or I'm calling the police." I exhaled slowly. Straightening up, "Go ahead." She froze, like she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Then she hit the dial button. I watched. Her with the calm of a man holding 4 separate surveys, a copy of his deed, and a letter from zoning enforcement, all laminated and organized in a folder inside the cab of my truck. She barked into the phone like a woman reporting a home invasion. "Yes. Hello. I'd like to report an unauthorized construction on Rosegate Lane. Yes, right now, he's digging holes with some kind of tool." I stared at her, not saying a word. Not moving, just watching. She hung up and gave me the smuggest smile I had ever seen. "They're on their way." "Cool," I said, and went back to digging. 15 minutes later, the squad car pulled up. 2 officers got out, 1 male, 1 female. They looked more amused than alarmed when they saw the scene. "Sir," the woman said, "you the one building the fence?" "That's right, ma'am. Can I see some identification and any permits if you have them?" "Sure thing." I walked to my truck, pulled out the folder, and handed it over. She flipped through it, eyebrows lifting. "This is all in order." I nodded. "My grandfather left me the lot. I confirmed it with zoning last month. I'm not part of the HOA, and this fence is within my property lines, per the county map." Linda marched up, waving her clipboard like a sword. "He can't do this. This is private community property. He's violating the bylaws." The male officer turned to her politely. "Ma'am, this appears to be a private lot, not governed by the HOA according to the documentation provided." She looked like someone had just slapped her with a wet sponge. That's impossible. That land touches common grounds. The officer nodded. Touching isn't the same as belonging, ma'am. Linda's face went red. A vein throbbed in her temple. I will be contacting our attorney. That's your right, the officer said with a shrug. But as far as we're concerned, nothing illegal's going on here. They left Linda, didn't. She stood there for another 10 minutes, glaring like she was trying to bore holes through my skull with her eyeballs. Finally, she stormed off without another word. Went back to digging? That was the moment I knew it wasn't over. Linda wasn't the type to let something go, especially when she felt disrespected. And the look I'd seen in her eyes wasn't just anger, it was insult. She saw me as a threat to her, control, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Later that evening, I found a paper taped to my door. It was from the HOA, a violation notice improper construction activity. Without HOA approval, I laughed my house wasn't even within their jurisdiction. It was like getting a parking ticket from your neighbor's kid because your car wasn't red enough. I ignored it. The next day, I got another one. This time, it said my lawn was unkempt and presented a visual hazard. I had mowed it 2 days ago with diagonal stripes. It was a joke. The following morning, my trash bin had been moved a foot out of place, and another violation note was waiting. It said I had placed refuse receptacles in view of the street for an extended period. It was 7:15. AM pickup was. At 8 I started to see the pattern. Linda wasn't just mad. She was trying to bully me into submission. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 6 years in the military, 2 more dealing with my grandfather's estate, and had the patience of a statue when properly motivated. So I smiled and waved when she passed. I trimmed my grass with a ruler. I placed my trash bins behind a decorative cedar screen that matched the fence. I submitted a letter to the HOA, even though I didn't have to, clarifying my property boundaries with county stamps and parcel numbers. No response. The harassment didn't stop. Instead, I started getting visits from random HOA members, some polite, some not. One asked me if I was aware of the shared use expectation of adjacent land. Another dropped a pamphlet about voluntary compliance and neighborhood harmony. Linda stood on her porch most mornings, arms crossed, eyes following me as I worked. It was almost funny. Almost. Then one morning, I came outside and found my garden beds had been trampled, fresh boot prints in the dirt, a crushed row of basil, a broken tomato cage. That wasn't funny. That was trespass. I installed cameras, high resolution, motion activated, silent. And I kept building. By the end of the week, the fence was nearly done, tall, clean, elegant, like a line drawn in the sand. The message was clear: I don't care who you think you are. This is my line, and I will hold it. Linda walked by again the next day. She stopped, stared at the nearly finished fence, and said nothing. Just shook her head slowly, like she was disappointed in me, like I had failed a test. But behind her eyes, I saw something else. Worry she was losing, and she didn't know what to do about it. Yet I went inside that night feeling the first true calm I'd had in days. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back off. I was wrong. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA side, was a notice of formal escalation and a threat of civil litigation. It was the exact moment I realized something she hadn't. This wasn't about offense. This was about power, and Linda had just declared war on the wrong guy. I smiled, folded the letter, and set it on the table. She wanted a battle. She was going to get one only. She didn't know I already held the ace and when I played it, the whole board was going to flip. I stood in front of the fence, arms folded, watching the morning sun crawl across the cedar grain. The birds were chirping, the air was warm, and for once everything felt calm, until I saw the yellow flags. Dozens of them, little plastic markers jabbed into the grass along the back of my property. Bright and obnoxious, like someone had dropped a trail of breadcrumbs for a blind surveyor. I walked the line slowly, recognizing the utility markers, but something was off. They weren't anywhere near the actual lines from the county survey. Instead, they curved out in a strange arc, slicing deep into my backyard. Then I heard the crunch of gravel. Linda again. She strode up with two men in polos, one holding a tablet, the other a long metal rod. "Good morning," she said, in that sugary voice that always meant something awful was about to happen. "We're here to mark the edge of HOA property." I didn't respond, just watched the man with the rod jam it into the soil and make a note on the screen. "According to our records," Linda continued, "this section actually belongs to the HOA. It's part of the shared green belt." "That's not true," I said calmly. "My deed includes this parcel. I verified it before I started building." She smiled with her teeth. "Not her eyes. I'm sure you believe that. But our documents disagree." The surveyor looked up and said something quietly to her. She nodded, then turned to me. "We'll be sending an official cease and desist. Any further construction on HOA property will result in legal action." I stared at her the way you look at a car crash happening in slow motion. Then I walked to my truck, pulled out the folder again, and laid it on the hood. "This has been filed with the county assessor. The coordinates match the original plat. No encroachment. No overlap." "You're wrong." Linda didn't even glance at the folder. "We have our own legal counsel who will be handling the matter." I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just watched her walk away again. Like she had already won. Like the truth didn't matter if she simply refused to acknowledge it. That night, I went online and pulled every public document related to the HOA. Their charter, their map, their boundaries, the original filings from when the neighborhood was established. What I found made me laugh. Linda's map was outdated by 10 years and had been revised twice since then, both times shrinking the HOA boundary after a developer lost a zoning fight with the county. My property wasn't in their territory, but that wasn't the best part. The best part was what I found in the plat records. Small, narrow lot directly behind Linda's house, less than 20 feet wide, completely surrounded by HOA homes, but never officially annexed. It had been listed as undeveloped. Buffer zone on the maps, but it wasn't owned by the HOA, it was owned by my grandfather, which meant now it belonged to me. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding, brain turning over possibilities like gears catching in an engine. The lot wasn't valuable, not in money, but in power. It gave me direct access to the HOA's private walking trail. And better yet, it sat right behind Linda's rose garden. I filed for confirmation with the assessor's office, sent in a request for updated deed recognition, and within 5 days the change was reflected publicly. I now owned the wedge of land directly behind the HOA president's property. And I had a plan. The next day, I returned to the fence line with more materials and a small team of contractors, all licensed, all professional. I paid them well and gave clear instructions. The second fence went up faster than the first, but this one didn't face my yard. It faced hers, 8 feet tall, same cedar, clean and elegant. It blocked her view entirely. 2 days later, I was sipping coffee on my porch when I heard it. Screaming. Not just yelling, but full-on enraged banshee. Shrieking, I walked to the edge of the yard, and there she was, clutching a piece of paper in one hand and a camera in the other. "You have no right to build this." "Sure I do," I said, sipping slowly. "That land's mine now." "This is harassment," she spat. "I will have you arrested. You'll have to explain to the judge why you're trespassing on my buffer lot again." Taranti, face contorted. "You think you're clever." "I know I am." She stormed off again. By now, the neighborhood was watching. Every morning, a few more neighbors walked their dogs a little slower. Near my house, some waved, some didn't. Most just stared. I didn't. Mindy wasn't hiding anything, but Linda was unraveling. She began sending emails to the HOA board twice a day, accusing me of intimidation, of visual disruption, of undermining community harmony. Then she called a special meeting. I went, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see her face when I read my ownership papers into the record. The room was packed, maybe 30 people, mostly homeowners, some board members, all sitting in folding chairs. In the clubhouse, Linda stood at the front, red, faced with a projector behind her showing a blurry photo of my fence. "This individual has violated the spirit of our community by building unauthorized structures, obstructing common views, and engaging in malicious property development," I raised. My hand. "I don't believe this forum has jurisdiction over my property," she glared. "You're disrupting a scheduled meeting. I'd like to read a statement." One of the board members, a man named Bill, nodded slowly. "Go ahead." I stepped forward, held up the documents, and began. "My name is Thomas. I own Lot 63 on Rosegate Lane, which sits outside the HOA boundaries per the 2008 zoning amendment. I have documentation from the county registrar, the assessor's office, and the original plat. I also now own parcel 63B, the strip directly behind the HOA trail, acquired legally and without dispute as of last month." I paused and let the silence settle. All development has been performed within zoning code, and no HOA covenant applies. To my properties, I am not a member and never have been. Linda opened her mouth, but I held up a finger. "One more thing, I have installed security cameras, which recorded multiple incidents of trespassing, vandalism, and unauthorized property markings. Those videos have not yet been submitted to authorities, but I will if further harassment continues." A murmur rippled through the room. Bill turned to Linda. "Is this true?" She looked like she was trying to swallow a handful of thumbtacks. "The documents don't match ours," another board member spoke. "If he owns the land, we have no say." I stepped back, folded the papers, and smiled. Linda's lips thinned into a bitter line. After the meeting, 3 neighbors approached me quietly. One asked if I could help them identify their own boundary lines. Another said she admired how calmly I handled everything. The third said nothing, just handed me a small tin of cookies and walked away. But Linda didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not until the police came back. This time, it was about a noise complaint from a hedge trimmer at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. I showed them the fence again, showed them the logs from the security cameras, showed them the time-stamped footage. They shrugged, said nothing seemed illegal, and left. I knew then that Linda had one last card to play, and she was about to use it. What she didn't know was that I had already reshuffled the deck, and when I played my hand, it would be game over. The air was thick with tension when the summons arrived at my door, plain white envelope, no return address. just my name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a notice from the HOA's lawyer demanding I immediately remove the fence citing breach of community rules and threats of a lawsuit that could drag on for months. I stared at the letter, feeling a slow smile curl across my lips. They thought they could scare me into backing down. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Linda at a local cafe, the one place neutral ground where tempers might have cooled. She looked exhausted, worn as if the battle had already taken its toll, but her eyes still held that cold fire of entitlement. "I want you to understand," she said, low voice barely above the clatter of cups. "You're making enemies." I leaned back, calm, steady. "I'm making a point, Linda," she scoffed. "You're making trouble. The HOA is a community. We follow rules that keep peace and property values up. And you think that includes ignoring deeds and legal boundaries?" She shrugged. "We have ways of enforcing." I smiled. "Then let's see." Over the next week, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers of the escalating fight. The fence had become a symbol, not just of property lines, but of resistance. I caught glances of curiosity from neighbors who once avoided eye contact, now nodding silently in support. Linda's messages to the board grew desperate, calling for emergency meetings, warning of bad publicity and potential lawsuits. But I was ready. I had spent hours poring through legal documents, preparing responses, and filing countersuits for harassment and unlawful interference. On a quiet Tuesday morning, I set up a live stream on social media, showing the fence from all angles, the clearly marked property lines, and the peaceful yard behind it. The comments flooded in dozens of neighbors expressing shock at the HOA president's aggressive tactics, and many declaring support for my right to protect my property. Just as the viewer count ticked into the hundreds, Linda stormed onto the lawn waving her phone. "You're breaking the rules, filming private property." "Filming my property, not yours," I said coolly. Her voice cracked with frustration. "I'm calling the police." They came again within the hour. 2 officers in crisp uniforms approached the fence. Their expressions polite, but firm, Linda briefed them with practiced ease. But I showed the documents, calmly walked them through the survey. Maps and the recorded deed transfers. They nodded, exchanged looks, and said there was no cause for action. Linda's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she doubled down behind closed doors. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived from her lawyer, this time with a demand to halt construction on the fence and remove any security cameras citing invasion of privacy and harassment of HOA members. I laughed out loud, reading it, sitting at my kitchen table with my lawyer on speakerphone. "We'll see about that," my lawyer said. "Your rights are clear, and your case is strong. We're filing a motion to dismiss their claims and counterclaiming for damages." The momentum had shifted. Linda's bravado faded in the face of mounting legal pressure, but she wasn't ready to quit. Instead, she tried something unexpected. She began showing up at community events with a fake smile plastered on her face, shaking hands, smiling for photos, but whispering poison behind closed doors. Rumors started circulating about my intentions, that I was trying to drive her out of the neighborhood, that I was a troublemaker and worse. I ignored it, mostly focusing on my garden and the fence. But late one evening, I found a note slipped under my door. "Stop now, or face consequences." My blood ran cold for a moment, but then I crumpled the note and threw it in the fire. I wasn't backing down. The final blow came when Linda called the local News-A reporter, showed up with a camera crew claiming to cover a story about HOA disputes, and neighborhood discord. I invited them in, offered coffee and a tour of the fence and the property lines. The segment aired that evening, painting a fair picture of the conflict, highlighting my documented ownership and Linda's aggressive tactics. Viewers flooded the station with calls and emails, siding with me and demanding accountability from the Holinda's carefully built reputation started to crumble. Her emails stopped coming, her calls unanswered. One afternoon, I heard her shouting from the street, "I want you to take down that fence," but this time I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop to find a news alert. The county assessor had officially recognized the updated boundaries, removing the disputed land from the HOA's jurisdiction. Smiled, leaning back, feeling the weight of victory settle slowly like dusk over the neighborhood. Linda's empire of control was slipping through her fingers, and I had every intention of watching it fall. The morning sun cut through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the living room floor. The air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. I sat at my desk, watching the clock tick toward the HOA board, meeting the one Linda had called to address the fence controversy once, and, for all I could hear the muffled chatter of neighbors gathering outside the community center, their voices a low hum of speculation and excitement. The door swung open, and Linda appeared, her usual confident mask cracked, revealing the strain beneath. Her eyes darted nervously as she clutched a stack of papers like a lifeline. I stood to greet her, steady, calm, and prepared. She barely acknowledged me instead, marching to the podium with a practiced grace that had begun to feel hollow. "Good evening, neighbors," she began, voice tight. "I understand the tension this fence has caused, but I assure you the HOA only wants to preserve the community spirit and property values." A few polite nods from the crowd, but the energy had shifted. They were waiting for the showdown, the moment everything would come to a head. I stepped forward, holding up the latest county document, official and stamped. "This fence stands on my property, legally acquired and surveyed. I have fulfilled every requirement and respected every law." A murmur spread across the room like wildfire. Linda's face flushed crimson, and her voice cracked. "Your actions have disrupted the harmony. We have rules and codes that must be followed." I held her gaze steady. "The only disruption has come from attempts to silence a rightful owner and intimidate a neighbor." She faltered, and suddenly the doors burst open. A group of neighbors walked in, carrying signs and smartphones, streaming live, the moment unfolding in real time. One spoke loudly, "We support Thomas and his right to protect his land. No more harassment, no more lies." The room shifted from tension to a collective roar of support. I looked at Linda, who was now visibly shaking, the HOA president, who had wielded power for years, was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Then the police entered, called by an anonymous tip. They listened patiently as I recapped the legal battle, the documentation, the harassment, and the property lines. Linda tried to interject, but the officers silenced her with a look that said enough. One handed her a summons for trespassing on private property on multiple occasions and warned her of possible charges if it continued. The crowd erupted in applause as Linda sank back into her seat, defeated, her authority stripped away. I smiled, knowing the battle was over, but the victory was sweeter for the journey it had taken. Later that evening, I received messages from neighbors thanking me for standing up, from those who once doubted me to those who quietly admired the courage to face a bully head-on. The fence stood tall, a symbol not just of property, but of resilience and justice. Linda's reign ended not with a bang, but a slow fade into silence, her power dismantled by truth and community. Resolve. As I locked the gate that night, I caught a glimpse of her through the window. Her shoulders slumped and eyes downcast, and I whispered to myself with a grin, sometimes the best fence is the one that keeps the truth out of reach. The neighborhood was finally free, and so was I. The story wasn't just about land or fences. It was about standing firm when no one else would, about fighting quietly with patience and proof, about winning not by brute force, but by letting the facts speak louder than threats. And in that moment, I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, where respect replaced fear, and boundaries were honored not just by law, but by heart.